Our taxpayers help us pay for the consequences that emerge from consensual degenerate behavior. Isn't European socialism fabulous? Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Apparently, not only is there a strong subculture to persuade lawmakers to remove any punishment for intentionally infecting others with HIV, but there's also a strong subculture that provides the thrill of being infected with HIV, and then the taxpayers pick up the tab. Coming from the Daily Mail, quote, "Sex roulette parties where one person is secretly HIV positive and nobody is allowed to use condoms are on the rise," warned the doctors. The parties are usually attended by gay men who are entertained by the thrill of not knowing whether they will be infected or not. Spanish doctors have noted a rise in the parties where attendees often take antiviral drugs to reduce the risk of transmission. Dr. Josep Malolas of Hospital Clinic Barcelona said that the parties are a sign that people have lost respect for HIV, reports El Periódico. "There is everything, sex roulette parties or sex parties you can only attend if you have HIV, he told the outlet. He added that some of the parties are known as blue parties because attendees take antiviral medication to cut the risk of transmitting the virus. Psychosexual therapist Kate Morley told Hello You, quote, "Going to sex roulette parties is about the risk. Partygoers think the higher the risk, the stronger the thrill. In the case of sex parties, the intense high is as you combine orgasm with high adrenaline." She advised, though, that the long-term consequences are dangerous. Isn't it wonderful? And I need to remind you that criticizing this makes you guilty of xerophobia. Because even degenerates who suffer consequences for their behavior have their own brand of cultural Marxist terminology. I suggest you do watch that video because I explain there where my interest in this topic stems from. So now let's look at the numbers. The CDC says that the average annual cost with ART medication goes somewhere around $23,000 in 2010 dollars, which is a bit over $25,000 in present-day dollars. Now, as of late, antiretroviral treatment is no longer the only solution, and for some patients, ART is demonstrably inferior to the newer solutions, which also tend to cost more. Now, how much more? Well, to the tune of $5,000 per month. That much more. There are basically two reasons these are very expensive. One is, of course, the low demand, and the two is the cost of research. Now, I'm old enough to remember people dying really fast from the time of infection. New medication is bloody expensive, but one can reasonably expect to die of old age rather than HIV complications if the treatment is applied consistently. So yeah, it really does cost to stay alive if you have HIV. Now, in progressive Europe, these costs are covered by the state. Every patient costs the state in Europe at least 60,000 euros annually in medication, medical services, welfare and other programs. And this cost varies very little by country, because the gross of this cost is in medical services and medication, which are pretty much fixed costs. Now, when I looked up the latest numbers, I couldn't help but smile a little bit. Whereas in 1990 the harshest areas were in Eastern Europe, now Eastern Europe has the lowest HIV infection rates and the lowest amount of people living with HIV. By contrast, the countries who accuse Eastern Europe of being homophobes who don't respect basic rights have the highest HIV infection rates. Now, the anomaly in this equation is Estonia, but then again, Budapest has more people living in it than Estonia, so I guess all it takes is one or two sex roulette parties to mess the country's statistics up. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because Eastern Europe, without exception, has laws on the books that it actually does enforce for those who willingly spread HIV. Just as we speak, the Czech Republic is persecuting 30 gay men for purposefully spreading HIV, and they face 10 years in jail each. My own country sends people for up to 15 years in jail for the crime of spreading HIV. Poland is a bit more lenient, with punishments going only up to 3 years in jail, but it is rigorously enforced. From the former Western Bloc countries, only Finland and the United Kingdom rigorously enforces punishments for those intentionally spreading their deadly diseases through their behavior. Technically, Germany also has such a law, but last time they needed it, they sentenced the offender to probation. You know, the offender had a vagina and an Islamic name and was a pop star, so heaven forbid such women would be guilty of anything. And of course, the feminists also defended her. Now, the HIV campaigners claim that prosecutions for such thing either does no good or even does more harm than good. And their only example for this is from the United States. Well, I do beg to differ. After all, countries that vigorously enforce harsh punishments for spreading HIV have smaller infection rates than those that don't. But I guess spurious correlations are only okay when the so-called human rights activists use them. So, with all that being said, let's sum it up. Basically, these degenerates have sex roulette parties to get a thrill of contacting HIV and get better boners and orgasms. There's nothing wrong with that, but why should the rest of us pay for it? Because, you see, it's all fine and dandy to go around whining, "Oh, my human rights," or that it is somehow bad to prosecute intentional spread of HIV, and that it's somehow bad to quote-unquote stigmatize those who are infected. So that's all fine and dandy, but as long as we pay for it, we do get a right to stigmatize, marginalize, prosecute, and so on and so forth. Now here's what I propose, both to cut the stigma and to cut the costs. Cut back the aid for HIV-infected individuals. Make it unprofitable to be HIV positive. Because in many areas of Europe, it is legitimately profitable to try to get yourself infected with HIV. The state has been showering these people with welfare. And at the very least, the way one contracted the infection should be a factor. It's one thing to have your treatment paid by the state if you got the infection, at work or by accident or in a hospital, which rarely happens, but when it does, especially when it happens in state-run hospital, it does kinda make a sense for the state to pay, at least in part, for the cost of medication. But when it happens following attending a sex roulette party, well, I say the state should not pay a dime for these kinds of individuals, neither in welfare nor in treatment. Now, would that mean that some of them would be left to die in the streets because they can't afford the treatment? Yes, it would, and there should be nothing wrong with that. As long as there is no direct consequence for one's actions, such degeneracy cannot and will not stop. Freedom really does go both ways. Yes, you can and you should be able to do whatever you want, but it is also your responsibility for the consequences, not ours. Socializing the costs of your reckless actions is not freedom. It's slavery. Why should we work to pay for the consequences of this kind of irresponsible behavior? I would say it's time to end slavery. And with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.